Sometimes the heart makes decisions that the mind cannot explain, and on that scorching Tuesday morning in Millbrook County, Rosalie Bennett's heart made a choice that would change 2 lives forever. The courthouse steps buzzed with the cruel energy of vultures circling their prey. Men in dusty boots and women clutching worn purses had gathered for the monthly auction, their eyes gleaming with the promise of cheap land and desperate bargains. Rosalie stood at the edge of the crowd, her black morning dress clinging to her swollen belly, 6 months pregnant and still wearing the widow's weeds that marked her recent loss. She'd come for farm equipment, nothing more. Her late husband's debts had left her with barely enough to survive, but she needed tools to work the small plot of land that remained hers. The auctioneer's voice boomed across the dusty square as he called out lots of furniture, livestock, and farming implements. Rosalie bid carefully on a plow, winning it for $3. She was preparing to leave when the man appeared. They led him up the courthouse steps like something out of a fever dream. He stood nearly 7 feet tall, his massive frame casting shadows across the crowd even in the midday sun. His chest was bare, bronzed from years under the prairie sun, muscles rippling beneath skin marked with old scars that spoke of hard labor and harder times. A wide-brimmed hat sat low over his eyes, but she could see the defiance burning there, the pride that even chains couldn't break. Behind him walked a small boy, maybe 8 years old, clutching a cloth bundle that contained everything he owned. Next lot, the auctioneer announced with practiced indifference, is the Garrett property settlement. Jacob Garrett, age 32, skilled in ranching, farming, and livestock. Includes his minor son, Timothy. Starting bid is $50 for the labor contract and guardianship rights. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Labor contracts were common enough, but selling a man with his child was rare, even in these desperate times. Rosalie watched as Jacob's jaw tightened, his massive hands clenched into fists despite the shackles. The boy pressed closer to his father's leg, dark eyes wide with fear. The contract includes full labor rights for 2 years to satisfy the debt of $87 owed to Millbrook Bank, plus court costs, the auctioneer continued. The man is healthy, strong, and the boy can work light duties. Do I hear 50? 50, called out Martha Hendricks, the widow who owned the largest farm in 3 counties. She was known for working her help to the bone. 60, shouted Tom Brady, whose reputation for cruelty to his workers was whispered about in church circles. Rosalie felt her heart hammering against her ribs. She looked at the little boy's terrified face, then at Jacob's proud, desperate eyes. In that moment, she saw something that reminded her of her late husband in his final days, when the illness had stripped away everything but his dignity and love for his family. 75, Martha called. 80, countered Brady, grinning like a wolf. The auctioneer raised his gavel. $80 going once. $100. The words left Rosalie's mouth before she realized she'd spoken. Every head turned toward her, and she felt heat rise in her cheeks. Her entire life savings was $112, hidden in a coffee tin under her kitchen floorboards. She was about to spend almost everything on 2 strangers. Ma'am? The auctioneer squinted at her. Did you say 100? Yes, Rosalie said, her voice stronger now. $100. A shocked silence fell over the crowd. Martha Hendricks shot her a look of pure venom. Tom Brady shook his head and spat in the dust. Jacob's eyes found hers across the distance, and for a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. $100 from the lady in black, the auctioneer announced. Going once, going twice, sold. As the crowd began to disperse, Rosalie made her way to the courthouse clerk to complete the paperwork. Her hands shook as she counted out the bills, leaving her with just $12 to her name. When she looked up, Jacob stood before her, the chains removed but his expression unreadable. Why? He asked, his voice deep and rough as gravel. Rosalie looked at his son, who was staring at her with a mixture of hope and suspicion. Because, she said quietly, everyone deserves a chance to keep their family together. Something shifted in Jacob's eyes then, a crack in the wall of pride and anger. "What do you expect from us?" "Honest work," she replied. "Nothing more, nothing less." As they walked toward her wagon, little Timothy tugged at his father's arm and whispered something. Jacob nodded and cleared his throat. "The boy wants to know if you're an angel." Rosalie almost smiled for the first time in months. "No, child. I'm just a woman who knows what it's like to lose everything." The ride home was silent except for the creaking of wagon wheels and the gentle snorting of her old mare, Bessie. Jacob sat stiffly beside her on the driver's bench, his son nestled between them. She could feel the tension radiating from the giant man, the uncertainty and wounded pride. As her small farmhouse came into view, Rosalie wondered if she'd made the biggest mistake of her life. The house was modest, with a sagging porch and shutters that needed painting. The barn leaned slightly to one side, and the fences were more gap than board. It wasn't much, but it was home. "This is it," she said as they pulled into the yard. Jacob surveyed the property with practiced eyes. "Roof needs patching. Those fence posts are rotted through. When's the last time anyone worked this land properly?" "Not since my husband took ill 2 years ago," Rosalie admitted. He nodded grimly. "We'll start with the barn. Can't have livestock if there's no proper shelter." Rosalie asked. Jacob looked at her then, really looked at her, taking in the black dress, the swollen belly, the exhaustion that lined her young face. "You bought us, ma. That makes this our responsibility too." As the sun began to set over the prairie, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Rosalie showed them to the small room off the kitchen that would serve as their quarters. It wasn't much, just space for 2 narrow beds and a chest of drawers, but it was clean and warm. "There's soap and towels on the washstand," she said. "Supper will be ready in an hour." When she turned to leave, Jacob's voice stopped her. "Ma'am? What should we call you?" "Rosalie," she said. "Just Rosalie." "Thank you, Rosalie," he said quietly, "for what you did today. I won't forget it." As she prepared a simple meal of cornbread and beans, Rosalie couldn't shake the feeling that her life had just taken a turn she never could have imagined. Outside, she could hear Jacob's deep voice explaining something to his son, and the sound was oddly comforting in the empty house. She had bought 2 strangers at a courthouse sale, and now they were under her roof. The practical part of her mind screamed that she was a fool, a pregnant widow who'd just spent her life savings on a dangerous gamble. But her heart whispered something different. Maybe, just maybe, she had bought herself a chance at something she thought she'd lost forever, hope. The rooster hadn't yet crowed when Rosalie woke to the sound of hammering. She struggled to her feet, her pregnant belly making every movement awkward, and peered out the kitchen window into the gray pre-dawn light. Jacob was already at work on the barn, his massive frame silhouetted against the morning mist, each swing of his hammer precise and powerful. 3 days had passed since the auction, and they had established an uneasy routine built on necessity and unspoken boundaries. Jacob worked from sunrise to sunset, attacking the farm's neglected repairs with the focused intensity of a man trying to prove his worth. Timothy helped where he could, following his father like a shadow, still wary of their new situation but gradually warming to Rosalie's gentle presence. She started the coffee and began preparing breakfast, moving carefully around the kitchen that felt both too small and too large at once. Too small for the awareness she felt whenever Jacob was near, too large for the silence that stretched between them during meals. "Morning, ma'am," Jacob said as he entered for breakfast, his son close behind. Both had washed at the pump, their hair still damp, but Jacob's shirt remained unbuttoned, revealing the broad expanse of his chest. Rosalie tried not to stare, but something about his casual confidence made her acutely aware of how long she'd been alone. "Morning," she replied, setting plates of eggs and biscuits on the table. "You were up early." "Habit," he said simply, settling his large frame onto the chair that creaked under his weight. "Timothy and I are used to rising before the sun." The boy nodded solemnly. "Papa says the best work gets done when the world's still sleeping." Rosalie smiled at the child. In just 3 days, Timothy had begun to shed some of his fearful reserve, though he still startled at unexpected noises and stayed close to his father's side. "What did you do before?" she asked. "Before you came here?" Jacob's fork paused halfway to his mouth. "Had a spread about 20 miles north of here. Nothing fancy, but it was ours." His voice carried the weight of loss. Bank decided otherwise when the drought hit and the cattle started dying. "I'm sorry," Rosalie said quietly. "Not your fault the rains didn't come." He took a bite of biscuit, chewing thoughtfully. "These are good. Timothy, what do you say?" "Thank you, Miss Rosalie," the boy said, his small face serious. After breakfast, Jacob returned to his work while Rosalie began her daily chores. She was hanging laundry on the line when she became aware of being watched. Timothy stood at the corner of the house, his dark eyes fixed on her with intense curiosity. "Can I help?" he asked hesitantly. "Of course," Rosalie said, handing him a clothespin. "Your father's been working so hard on the repairs. What do you think of the place so far?" Timothy considered this with the gravity of someone much older. "Papa says we're lucky you're kind. He says some people aren't." The simple honesty of it made Rosalie's throat tighten. "What happened to your mother, Timothy?" The boy's face went sad. "She got sick when I was little. Papa took care of her, but she went to heaven anyway. Then it was just us until the bad men came." Rosalie knelt down to his level, despite the awkwardness of her condition. "Well, you're safe now. Both of you." "Papa worries you'll change your mind about us," Timothy said with startling directness. The admission hit Rosalie like a physical blow. She looked across the yard to where Jacob was rebuilding the chicken coop, his movements efficient and determined. In the bright morning sun, she could see the tension in his shoulders, the way he glanced toward the house periodically as if expecting her to emerge with orders to leave. "Timothy," she said carefully, "what would make your papa happy?" The boy tilted his head, thinking. He used to smile more. "Before Mama died and we lost the ranch. He'd sing sometimes when he worked." As if summoned by their conversation, Jacob appeared around the corner of the house, carrying an armload of old fence posts. "Timothy, stop bothering Miss Rosalie. She's got enough to do without you chattering her ear off." "He's not bothering me," Rosalie said, rising to her feet with some difficulty. Jacob immediately moved forward, his hand reaching out to steady her before he caught himself and stepped back. "You shouldn't be doing heavy work," he said gruffly. "Not in your condition." "I'm pregnant, not made of glass," Rosalie replied, but she was touched by his concern. Something flickered in Jacob's eyes. "When are you due?" "October," she said. 3 months. He nodded slowly. "First child?" "Yes." The word came out softer than she intended, carrying all the fear and loneliness of facing motherhood alone. For a moment, they stood there in the morning sunlight, two people bound together by circumstance and need, each carrying their own burden of loss and uncertainty. Then Jacob cleared his throat and stepped back. "I'll finish the chicken coop today. Tomorrow I'll start on the back fence. The one by the creek is completely down." "Jacob," Rosalie said, stopping him as he turned to go. "You don't have to work so hard. The contract doesn't require." "The contract requires my labor," he interrupted, his voice tight. "But this." He gestured around the farm. "This feels like more than that. You gave us dignity when you could have bought us cheap. That matters." After he walked away, Rosalie stood holding the wet laundry, feeling the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders like a heavy shawl. She had thought she was saving them, but perhaps they were saving each other. That evening, as they sat down to dinner, Rosalie made a decision. "I think we need to talk about what this arrangement really is," she said. Jacob's fork froze halfway to his mouth. Timothy looked between them with worried eyes. "I bought your labor contract," Rosalie continued, "but I don't want servants. I want partners. This farm is too much for one person, especially now." She placed a hand on her belly. "I need help, and you need a place to belong. If we're going to make this work, we need to be honest about what we expect from each other. Jacob set down his fork, studying her face. What are you proposing? A real partnership. You work the land, I'll handle the house and books. We share the profits, if there are any. And when your contract is up in 2 years, if you want to stay, we'll make it permanent. Legal partnership, not ownership. The silence stretched between them, heavy with possibility and risk. Finally, Jacob spoke. Why would you do that? You barely know us. Rosalie looked at Timothy, who was watching the exchange with wide eyes, then back at Jacob. Because I've seen how you treat your son. How you work. How you carry yourself even when everything's been taken from you. That tells me who you are. Jacob's throat worked as he swallowed hard. And if the baby comes and you change your mind? If you decide you don't want strangers around your child? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Rosalie met his eyes steadily. Then we'll figure it out together. But I won't send you away because I'm scared. Fear is a poor foundation for any partnership. Timothy suddenly spoke up. Papa, can we stay? Please? Jacob looked at his son, then back at Rosalie. What about the neighbors? The town? A widow living with a single man and his child, people will talk. Let them talk, Rosalie said with more conviction than she felt. I'm tired of living my life according to other people's opinions. Jacob was quiet for a long moment, his calloused hands folded on the table. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. All right, partners. He extended his hand across the table, and Rosalie took it. His palm was warm and rough with calluses, completely engulfing her smaller hand. The contact sent an unexpected jolt through her, and from the way his eyes widened slightly, she knew he felt it too. Partners, she agreed, and for the first time since her husband's death, Rosalie Bennett felt like she might have a future worth fighting for. August brought a heat wave that seemed determined to test every living thing on the prairie, but it also brought something unexpected to the Bennett farm, the sound of laughter. It started small, with Timothy's giggle when Rosalie accidentally got flour in her hair while teaching him to make biscuits. Then Jacob's low chuckle when she declared war on the stubborn milk cow who refused to cooperate. By the time the month was half over, the little farmhouse that had been silent as a tomb for 2 years was filled with the warm sounds of a family finding its rhythm. Rosalie's belly had grown round and prominent, making her movements slower but somehow more graceful, like a ship navigating calm waters. Jacob had taken to hovering nearby whenever she attempted anything that required reaching or lifting, his protective instincts stronger than any contract terms. I can hang my own laundry, she protested one morning as he gently took the wet sheets from her hands. I know you can, he replied, stretching to pin a sheet to the line with easy reach. But why strain yourself when I'm here? The casual intimacy of the moment struck her like lightning. Here was this giant of a man, hanging her underthings and nightgowns on the line with the same matter-of-fact care he showed everything else. Her late husband had never helped with such domestic tasks, considering them beneath his notice. Jacob, she said softly, you don't have to take care of me. He paused, a wet pillowcase in his hands, and looked at her with those steady brown eyes. Maybe I want to. The words hung between them like a bridge neither was quite ready to cross, but the possibility was there, shimmering in the morning heat. Their partnership had evolved beyond mere convenience. Jacob's knowledge of farming complemented Rosalie's careful bookkeeping and planning. Together, they had transformed the failing farm into something that actually turned a small profit. The vegetable garden flourished under Rosalie's care, while Jacob's repairs to the barn and fences had made it possible to keep chickens and a milk cow again. But it was the small moments that mattered most. Jacob teaching Timothy to whittle while Rosalie mended clothes on the porch. The three of them sharing stories after dinner, Timothy's eyes wide with wonder at Rosalie's tales of her childhood in Missouri, Jacob's quiet accounts of his life before loss changed everything. One evening in late August, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, Timothy made an announcement that changed everything. I dreamed about the baby last night, he said, settling against Rosalie's side like it was the most natural thing in the world. Rosalie's hands stilled on her belly. What kind of dream? It was a girl, Timothy said with absolute certainty. She had yellow hair like yours and she was laughing. Papa was teaching her to ride the old mare, and you were watching and clapping your hands. Jacob's face had gone very still. Dreams are just dreams, son. But Timothy shook his head stubbornly. This one felt real. She's going to be my sister, isn't she, Miss Rosalie? The question hung in the evening air like a prayer or a wish. Rosalie felt tears prick her eyes. Would you like that, Timothy? Yes, the boy said simply. Papa and I have been alone for a long time. It would be nice to have a bigger family. After Timothy went to bed, Rosalie and Jacob remained on the porch, neither willing to break the spell of the evening. The night sounds of crickets and distant owls provided a gentle soundtrack to their silence. He's getting attached, Jacob said finally. So am I, Rosalie admitted. Jacob turned to look at her, studying her face in the moonlight. This isn't what either of us planned. No, she agreed. But maybe it's what we needed. The conversation might have gone further, but Rosalie suddenly gasped and pressed both hands to her belly. Jacob was on his feet instantly, his face etched with concern. What is it? Are you all right? She's kicking, Rosalie laughed, relief and wonder mixing in her voice. Really kicking. Here, feel. Without thinking, she grabbed his hand and pressed it to her belly. For a moment, Jacob froze, the intimacy of the contact overwhelming them both. Then the baby kicked again, a strong flutter against his palm, and his face transformed with wonder. She's strong, he whispered. Timothy was right about it being a girl, Rosalie said softly. I can feel it. They stood there in the moonlight, his large hand covering her belly, feeling the life growing within. When the baby settled, Jacob started to pull his hand away, but Rosalie covered it with both of hers, holding it in place. Thank you, she said quietly. For what? For being here. For caring. For making this feel like a home instead of just a house. Jacob's thumb moved gently across her belly, a caress so tender it made her heart ache. Rosalie, I need you to know something. She waited, hardly breathing. This stopped being about the contract weeks ago, he said, his voice rough with emotion. What I feel for you, it's not gratitude or obligation. It's, I know, she whispered. I feel it too. They might have kissed then, might have crossed that bridge they'd been approaching for weeks, but Timothy's voice called from inside the house. Papa? Miss Rosalie? I had a bad dream. The spell broken, they separated quickly. Jacob cleared his throat while Rosalie smoothed her hair, both of them flustered as teenagers caught holding hands. Coming, son, Jacob called, but before he went inside, he caught Rosalie's hand. We'll talk more, he promised. Yes, she agreed. We will. But as August faded into September, their promised conversation kept getting postponed by the demands of daily life. The harvest needed attention, preserving needed to be done, and winter preparations couldn't wait. They worked side by side, their partnership seamless and natural, but the deeper conversation remained elusive. It was as if they both sensed that once certain words were spoken, there would be no going back. The comfortable arrangement they'd built might crumble, or it might transform into something deeper and more frightening than either had imagined. So they waited and worked, and pretended that the growing tension between them was just the heat of late summer, that the way Jacob's eyes followed her movements was merely practical concern, that the way Rosalie's pulse quickened when he was near was simply the effect of pregnancy on her system. But Timothy, with the clarity that children sometimes possess, saw what the adults were trying to ignore. One evening, as Rosalie tucked him into bed, he looked up at her with his father's serious brown eyes. Miss Rosalie, he said quietly, when the baby comes, will you and Papa get married? Like in the stories? The question hit her like a physical blow. Timothy, why would you ask that? Because Papa looks at you the way he used to look at Mama, the boy said with devastating honesty. And you look at him like the ladies in church look at their husbands. And we all live together like a family anyway. From the mouth of a child, Rosalie thought, came the truth none of them had been brave enough to speak aloud. But before she could formulate an answer, Timothy had drifted off to sleep, leaving her to wrestle with questions that had no easy answers. In 3 weeks, maybe 4, her baby would be born. And then everything would change one way or another. October arrived with a vengeance, bringing with it the kind of storm that reminded prairie dwellers how small they were against the vast indifference of nature. The wind howled all day, rattling the windows, and by evening, the sky had turned an ominous green-black that made even the animals nervous. Rosalie, at nearly 9 months pregnant, felt like a ship preparing to dock after a long voyage. The baby had been restless all day, as if sensing the approaching tempest. She watched from the kitchen window as Jacob and Timothy worked together to secure the last of the shutters, a familiar warmth spreading through her chest at the sight of them. They had become a family in all but name. As the first fat raindrops began to splatter against the windows, Jacob and Timothy hurried inside, bringing with them the smell of rain and the electric energy of the storm. "It's going to be a big one," Jacob said, shaking the water from his hat. "We should prepare for..." He stopped mid-sentence as he looked at Rosalie. She was gripping the back of a chair, her face pale and drawn. "Rosalie..." His voice was sharp with concern. "I'm all right," she managed, but another contraction gripped her, stronger than the first. She couldn't hide the gasp that escaped her lips. Jacob was beside her instantly, his large hands gentle as they steadied her. "How long have you been having pains?" "Since this morning," she admitted. "But they were small. I thought it was just the storm." "Timothy," Jacob said, his voice calm despite the alarm in his eyes, "I need you to help me get Miss Rosalie to bed. Then you're going to ride Bessie to town and fetch the midwife." "Papa, I can't ride in this storm," Timothy protested, looking out at the wind-lashed darkness. Rosalie, panting from another contraction, confirmed his fears. "The midwife lives 2 miles away. Timothy can't make it there and back in this weather." Jacob's jaw tightened as he processed this. They were completely alone. "All right," he said, his voice steady and sure. "Then we'll manage this ourselves." "Jacob, you can't," Rosalie began. "I've helped birth plenty of calves and foals," he interrupted, though his face had gone pale. "Can't be that different." Despite her pain, Rosalie almost smiled. "I hope you're right." The next few hours passed in a blur. Jacob transformed from a rancher into a caregiver with the same focused determination he brought to everything else. He boiled water, gathered clean linens, and kept Timothy busy with small tasks in the kitchen, away from the more frightening aspects of childbirth. As the storm raged outside, shaking the little house with its fury, Rosalie labored. Jacob stayed by her side, his large hand dwarfing hers as she gripped it through each contraction. His calm presence was the anchor that kept her from drowning in the pain. "Tell me about your dream house," he said during a brief lull, trying to distract her. "The one you'd build if you could build anything." "Big kitchen," she panted, "with windows facing east. And a porch that wrapped all the way around, so there was always somewhere to sit in the shade." "Sounds perfect," Jacob said softly. "A nursery painted yellow because you never know if it's going to be a boy or a girl," she managed before another contraction seized her. Jacob's hand tightened on hers. "This baby's going to be so loved, Rosalie. You know that, right?" She looked into his eyes, seeing something there that made her heart skip despite the pain. "By all of us?" "By all of us," he confirmed, and the promise in his voice carried more weight than any marriage vow. Near midnight, as the wind howled like a living thing, Rosalie's labor reached its climax. Jacob had sent Timothy to his room, and now it was just the two of them, facing the miracle and terror of birth together. "I can see the head," Jacob said, his voice filled with wonder and fear. "Rosalie, you're doing beautifully. Just a little more." She bore down with everything she had left, and suddenly the baby slipped free into Jacob's waiting hands. For a moment, the only sound was the storm outside and their labored breathing. Then a thin, reedy cry filled the room. "It's a girl," Jacob whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "Just like Timothy dreamed." He quickly cleaned the baby and wrapped her in a soft blanket, then placed her on Rosalie's chest. The infant was tiny but perfect, with a cap of pale blonde hair and eyes that seemed to take in the world with solemn curiosity. "Hello, little one," Rosalie whispered, tears streaming down her face. "I've been waiting so long to meet you." Jacob knelt beside the bed, his large hand gentle as he stroked the baby's cheek. "She's beautiful, Rosalie. Perfect." In that moment, with the storm raging outside and new life cradled between them, everything else fell away. The contract that had brought them together, the uncertainty about their future, the careful walls they'd built around their hearts, none of it mattered. There was only this: a man, a woman, and the child they had brought safely into the world together. "Timothy was right," Rosalie said softly. "She does look like she belongs with us." Jacob's eyes met hers over the baby's head. "What will you name her?" Rosalie had thought about this for months, but now, looking at the tiny face and then at Jacob's tender expression, she knew. "Hope," she said. "Her name is Hope." The irony wasn't lost on either of them. Hope, the thing Rosalie had thought was gone forever, the thing Jacob had lost when his ranch was taken away, had literally been born in their hands on this wild night. "Hope Bennett," Jacob said, testing the name. Then, more quietly, "She'll need a father." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. Rosalie looked at this man who had delivered her child with such gentle strength, who had stayed by her side through the long, frightening night, who looked at her daughter as if she were already his own. "Yes," she whispered. "She will." By morning, the storm had passed, leaving behind a world washed clean and bright with possibility. Timothy crept into the room to meet his new sister, his eyes wide with wonder as he gently touched her tiny hand. "She's so small," he breathed. "But she's ours, isn't she?" Jacob and Rosalie exchanged a look over the children's heads. "Yes," Jacob said firmly. "She's ours." As the sun rose over the prairie, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, the four of them formed a circle of warmth and love in the little farmhouse. They had started as strangers brought together by desperation, but they had become something precious and rare, a family born not of blood or law, but of choice. The days and weeks that followed Hope's birth were a quiet, sun-drenched dream. The rhythm of the farm had settled into a new, comfortable pattern built around the needs of a newborn. Rosalie spent her time nursing and caring for the baby, feeling a happiness she thought she'd never experience again. Jacob and Timothy, meanwhile, were a whirlwind of quiet activity, working the fields and tending to the animals, their movements softened by the constant awareness of the baby sleeping in the house. Jacob's protectiveness had become a tangible thing. He built a ramp so Rosalie could more easily get the baby's carriage down the porch steps and installed a new latch on the gate to keep out stray animals. He even took to humming a soft tune as he worked, the low sound a constant comfort in the house. One evening, as the sun began to set, Rosalie was sitting on the front porch, rocking Hope in her arms. The baby was finally asleep after a long day of fussing, and Rosalie felt a profound sense of peace. The world was quiet, save for the rhythmic creak of the porch swing. Jacob walked up the path, his long shadow stretching out before him. He had been working in the fields all day, and his face was streaked with dirt, but his eyes were gentle as he looked at her. "She finally asleep?" he asked quietly. "Just did," Rosalie said, gesturing for him to sit in the chair beside her. He settled his massive frame into the smaller chair, the wood groaning slightly. For a long moment, they simply sat in comfortable silence, watching the sky change from gold to brilliant shades of crimson and purple. "You know," Jacob said, his voice a low rumble, "I had it all planned out in my head. A grand, romantic proposal. The kind you read about in books." He ran a hand through his hair, suddenly seeming nervous. "But the day you were laboring, all those plans just seemed to fall away. All that mattered was getting you and that baby through the night. And now, it feels like there's no right time." Rosalie turned her head to look at him, her heart thumping softly in her chest. "Rosalie," he began, his voice dropping to a near whisper, "I know you bought me for a debt. But somewhere along the way, you saved my life. And not just mine, but Timothy's too. You gave us back our dignity and our purpose. And now, you've given us hope." He reached out and gently touched the baby's blanket. "I don't know what it is about you about this place, but it's home now. You're home. And I want to be your home too. He finally looked at her, his dark eyes vulnerable and earnest in the fading light. I'm not going to ask for a partnership anymore. I want a family. A real one. The kind where we share everything, not just the profits. I want to be your husband and Hope's father. I want to build that house with the east-facing windows and the wraparound porch for you. I want to sing to you both when the sun rises and hold you when the storms come. I want to love you for the rest of our lives if you'll let me. Rosalie's eyes filled with tears, a mix of joy and disbelief. She thought about the lonely years after her husband's death, the terrifying journey of becoming a mother alone, the desperation that had led her to a courthouse sale. And she thought about this kind, strong man who had taken on her burdens as his own, who had held her hand while she gave birth, and who was now offering her a future more beautiful than anything she had ever dared to dream. Yes, she whispered, the word a soft prayer in the quiet evening. Oh yes, Jacob. He let out a long breath he seemed to have been holding. He reached for her hand and she placed it in his. His calloused fingers closed around hers, and the contact felt like a promise of a lifetime of shared burdens and shared joys. We have to get married quickly, she said, a small, happy laugh escaping her lips. Timothy's been asking too many questions. A slow smile spread across Jacob's face, the first truly unburdened smile Rosalie had ever seen. He's been working on me all month. He told me he already has my wedding suit all picked out, a brand new shirt and a clean pair of pants. Rosalie laughed openly now, and Hope stirred, but a quick rocking motion from Rosalie soothed her back to sleep. We can get married in the church, Rosalie said. Nothing fancy. Just us and Timothy and Hope. And maybe the midwife. I owe her a thank you. Sounds perfect, Jacob said, his voice thick with emotion. He leaned in and gently kissed her, a tender, solemn kiss that spoke of patience and new beginnings. It wasn't a kiss born of passion, but of gratitude, love, and the quiet understanding that they had both found what they had been searching for. The loneliness that had plagued them for so long was finally gone. As the last light faded from the sky, they sat together on the porch, a silent promise hanging in the air. The stars began to emerge one by one, a magnificent tapestry stretched across the heavens. Rosalie looked at Jacob, then at the baby sleeping peacefully in her arms, and a sense of profound rightness washed over her. She had purchased a man to save her farm, and in the process, she had found her family. She had saved herself, too, and in return, she had been given a love more precious and a future more full of hope than she could ever have imagined.